Welcome. We're going to be talking about chapter 3 today, about stress and its effects. And we're going to be building on those ideas over the next several chapters. So you'll probably see some ideas repeatedly showing up. And I hope that this helps you to sort of make connections between those. So let's think about stress. Stress in general is, women are reporting higher levels of stress than men. I couldn't find numbers that included this year. My guess is that this year is higher, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But in general, both men and women report less stress than they did during, at 2007, 2008, during the Great Recession. Economic problems are worse right now, so that may be somewhat different. In general, people are reported that average stress levels, for the last month, this orange line, are, that they're experiencing more stress than what they perceive as healthy, this green line. And, more or less stable, except for those 2007, 2008 levels. These are numbers from 2020. In general, we're reporting higher levels of stress than in 2019. So this is a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being great deal of stress. Right now, non-parents are reporting about 5.5. I think last year it was 4.9. This year, parents are reporting even more stress. So they're reporting about 6.7. Not surprising, worrying about their children, worrying about school, worrying about childcare, trying to keep kids safe during a difficult time. So, very high levels of stress. And about half of them say that their stress levels are high, 8, 9, or 10 on a 10-point scale. So these are older numbers. 2013. Sources of stress, most people are identifying things like money and work, the economy, family, relationships, health problems, and personal health problems for half of the respondents. So large number of different kinds of stressors, that people are reporting as high stressors or high sources of stress. I'm going to make this distinction between stress, which is the experience, and stressor, which is the thing causing us stress. This is a social readjustment rating scale, which you can find in your book. And if we were doing this face-to-face, I would ask you to complete it, or complete the college version of this. And you'll notice that there are things here that are negative: death of a spouse, divorce, marital separation, but also things that are more positive. Things like Christmas, vacation, change in number of family get-togethers, so either increased or decrease, getting a loan, change in school, whatever. So one of the things you should be thinking about here as we're talking about stress is that that both positive things and negative things cause us stress. So that's one. But you'll also find things here that you think are rated more significantly than what you think it should be. 39 for gain of a new family member. Maybe it's a positive event, but it may not feel that way, and any change tends to cause us stress. But as we're thinking about this, also think about the ways that we think about things, and how we think about things is part of what contributes to stress and our perception of stress. So stress isn't necessarily a bad thing. In general, we find this inverted U hypothesis, inverted U relationship, that we tend to respond, perform best at a moderate level of arousal. But it's actually more complicated than that. If it's a simple task like this, so circling the number of E's in your textbook, you are likely to need higher levels of arousal in order to perform well. That if you weren't highly aroused, you'd just sort of, doesn't matter. But if, for example, I were to say that I would give you a quarter for every E that you circled on the first page of your textbook, you'd probably do a better job. So I've just increased the level of arousal. On the other hand, for a complex task, so for example, calculus, you want to do what you can to decrease the level of arousal, because in that case, the arousal interferes with your performance. So if it were a comprehensive final in your calculus class, perhaps that would make it more difficult for you to perform as well as you could. So let's think about some of the causes of stress, more proximal. We're not talking about the stressors, but what's happening within our body that makes that, makes something stressful or not. We're going to see changes in the autonomic nervous system. We're going to see changes in the HPA axis, and we're going to see changes in attributions. And this last piece, in terms of attributions, is really the place that we're going to focus on this semester, because that's the place that's easiest for us to control. So in terms of our autonomic nervous system, it's sort of like there are two branches, sort of like the push me pull you in the Dr. Dolittle stories or Dr. Dolittle movie. The sympathetic nervous system gets us aroused and prepared to deal with a stressor. So someone is attacking us, or perhaps we're running up and down the stairs, or we're worried about an exam. Our sympathetic nervous system is more active. Now, one point to pay attention to is that your sympathetic nervous system is more active regardless of whether it's an attack or it's a more cognitive sort of task. And that's an interesting piece, one that we'll probably play with throughout the semester. Our sympathetic nervous system is designed to deal with a stressor, but it may not necessarily deal with it most effectively. The parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, tends to be more aroused, more active when we are at rest, when we're relaxing, when we're meditating, when we're praying, when we're spending time with someone that we love and we're feeling safe. So our pupils constrict, our mouth salivates, our palms are dry, our heart rate slows down, our digestion is stimulated. So you'll see one or the other tends to be more active. And from my perspective, I think that the thing that we want to be paying attention to is that as we pay attention, or these are all sort of connected. And so as we make changes in one part of the system, the other parts also are changed. So in meditation, as we slow our breath, then also our heart rate goes down and we feel more relaxed. Conversely, as you are running up the stairs, your heart rate increases, and so does your breathing, and your mouth dries and your palms sweat. So here's the second part of that, what happens. So the HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenals. The hypothalamus, so stress causes some changes in the hypothalamus, in your brain, which influences the pituitary, which is at the base of your brain. The pituitary causes some increases in adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, and hypothalamus causes some changes in the autonomic nervous system, particularly the sympathetic nervous system, which gets us aroused. Both of those, the autonomic nervous system affects the adrenal medulla, so on top of the kidney, and ACTH affects the adrenal cortex. So again, part of the adrenal gland on top of the kidney, which is causing some releases in corticosteroids and catecholamines to prepare you to deal with a task. Again, these things happen whether or not it's something that is adaptive. So for example, running up and down the stairs or running from an attacker, or if it's something that's maladaptive, as when you're taking an exam. Prolonged stress, initially, the stress response or that we're seeing in the general adaptation syndrome, it prepares us to deal with the stress and it helps us to handle it better. And that's true both in the alarm reaction and also in resistance. But our ability to handle stress drops during exhaustion. So for example, during finals week, people may start losing their temper, they may get sick, and they're just not able to handle stress in the way that they otherwise would have handled it. So the third part that I want you to pay attention to, and this is a part that we're going to be thinking about throughout the semester, and we'll approach it in a number of different ways. But this third part is that the way that you see something makes a difference. So if you see a situation or experience a stressor and perceive it as relevant to you and threatening, so then you're going to experience more stress. But if you're seeing it as relatively irrelevant or harmless, no stress. And if you don't perceive yourself as having sufficient coping resources, you're likely to experience stress. But if you say, ooh, I have this pop quiz, but I know that I'm prepared, no stress. Okay? So the take-home point here is, how do you think about things? And that means that you and your best friend may look at the same situation and perceive it differently as either stressful or not stressful. And as an empathic friend, you want to be paying attention to how they perceive it rather than only how you perceive it. Let's think about burnout. So, this is in some ways a little bit like some of the ideas that we talked about in terms of general adaptation syndrome, But there are a number of things that lead to burnout: being overloaded, not having enough social support, in your work situation, not having enough control or autonomy. And generally, we do better when we're given control in a situation. Not being recognized or rewarded for the things that you do well. And we then experience things like exhaustion, cynicism, and lowered self-efficacy. The consequences of that are that we're more likely to get ill. Chapter 5 that we'll talk about. More likely to not go to work because we're sick, more likely to leave a job, we're less likely to feel committed to it and go the extra yard, and we're likely to do less at work. So we need to be paying attention to this in order to reduce this. Here's another way of thinking about this, and we'll come back maybe talking about this in when we're talking about psychopathology. That stress, as we've said, has affects stress hormones and neurotransmitters. It affects the ways that we think about things. It also affects our relationships. And each of these things puts us at risk of a mood disorder. Okay. So let's step back and see a little bit more. Here's our potential stressor. And remember, not everybody sees a situation as a stressor. But some of us appraise it either positively or negatively, depending on what our primary and secondary appraisals are. That's going to produce, certain kinds of emotional responses, physiological and behavioral responses, which may either be positive or negative. And so in chapter 4, we're going to talk about ways to maximize these positive outcomes. And so things like these are what we're going to pay attention to in terms of increasing our stress tolerance, our social support, our hardiness, our optimism about the world. Whether or not we look at things, and are looking for thrills or not, perceive them in that way. And just our sort of baseline autonomic reactivity. All of those influence what happens at each of these 3 levels. We'll probably come back to this figure because it's a complicated one, and put the time in, but you've seen some parts of this in other slides today. And take care. Have a good day.